This video will show you how to replace the rear sealed wheel bearing on a Ford Edge. This will be located behind your rear wheel. Let's get into it. A quick note about doing this job, you will find if you have an extended T60 Torx socket, this will come in handy for the removal of the wheel bearing. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. Safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've completed that, if you have a center cover, go ahead and remove that now. You're going to be looking for a small tab area that you can make your way in between, and we'll gently pry this out. After you have that removed, we'll continue on to our 5 19mm lug nuts. We got the lug nuts off, let's remove the wheel. Now that we have the wheel off, we have a clear view of our rear brakes. Let's start by pushing back our caliper piston. To push back our caliper piston, I'm just using a small pry bar. I'm going to go inside the slot on the caliper. I'm attempting to hit up against my brake rotor, and then I'm going to start drawing this away from the vehicle, which is going to push in on the piston. Now, once you do find that you have movement from this, we're going to continue on along the back side of the caliper. We're going to remove two 15mm headed bolts holding the caliper bracket in place. Now, from along the back side of the caliper, we can see our lower caliper bracket bolt. The upper bolt is right along this area here. Let's start removing the first bolt. We'll give it a quick inspection and start to pack in a couple threads. That'll hold the caliper bracket in place while we continue on to the next mounting bolt. Now, as we start pulling the caliper out and away, we need to give our brake pads a close inspection. These look good, so I'm going to go ahead and set this aside, putting no pressure on my flex hose. Now let's start removing the brake rotor. You may find that you have to de-adjust your parking brake shoe, which is located behind this area. If that is the case, you want to make your way into the port here. If there's some sort of rubber protector, go ahead and remove that. I'm just going to use an angled pick. We should be able to pull this out of here. Just go ahead and give that a quick inspection. We'll set it aside. We will be reusing it. Now, if you were to look inside this area, you're going to find an adjustment cog. We're going to use a flat blade screwdriver to adjust the shoe inward, de-adjusting the parking brake. Let's go one way or the other until it feels as though we have movement. Now, continuing on, you should be able to pull this out of place. If it still feels as though it's stuck in place, you may have to lightly tap with a hammer. If you're planning on reusing your brake rotor, do not hit on the braking surface. Just a quick inspection of that, we'll set it aside. The next thing that we're going to do is start removing our two axle nuts. Yes, I said there's two. You have an outer axle nut and an inner axle nut. We'll be using a 32mm socket for each of these. During the removal process, if you find that this wants to spin on you, you could bring the vehicle closer to the ground, use a pry bar diagonally through your lug studs down towards the ground, preventing this from turning on you. With that said, let's continue on with the removal of these two mounting nuts. There's our inboard mounting nut. Now we have to separate the axle from the wheel bearing. For this, I use some penetrant inside this area and we'll use a hammer and punch. The punch is going directly in the center of the axle so we do not damage the axle or the threads. Once you do have movement from this, we'll continue on. Along the back side of the backing plate, to remove our emergency brake cable, you're going to find that you have two 10mm headed mounting bolts holding the cable to a bracket. Ours is pretty rusted, so I'm just attempting to break it free. As we start looking along the inboard side, we can see where our rear axle is. We'll follow this inboard. As you look in, you can see the axle ABS wheel speed sensor exciter ring, but moving a little further outward, we can see our mounting bolts. There's one in the lower corner here, there's one just above it, and then of course we have the same on the other side. They're forming a square. Now here's where we have to use the specialty T60 Torx socket. You can tell that it's extended and thin. As we start removing these bolts, you want to be careful not to cause any damage to the ABS exciter ring. You may have to loosen the bolts just enough that they barely touch up against the axle, continue on to all others, and then we'll press the wheel bearing and backing plate away. That should give us more space so we can continue on with the removal of the bolts. The bolts will stay in place. Once you have the first bolt loosened, continue on to all others. On to our next mounting bolt. This is going to be the last bolt holding everything in place. Just be aware of that so nothing falls and potentially hurts you. All 4 bolts are loosened from the inboard side. Let's make our way out from under the vehicle. We'll start having a look at the bearing and backing plate. Now the next thing we're going to do is install a bearing removal tool. There's going to be several different types of tools. Essentially with this one, I'm using the plate, I'm using my lug studs and some lug nuts holding this in place to the bearing hub. We're going to make our way with the driver, and I always like to press up against where my caliper bracket would be. So I'm just going to rotate this. We'll bring the driver into position. As I start applying pressure, it should start pulling the wheel bearing out and away. Of course, we're being careful not to cause any damage along the way. Just a quick note about this, when you start removing the bearing, it'll typically start removing the backing plate as well. Keep in mind, we do still have our emergency brake cable attached to the back side of the backing plate as well. Now that I have that broken free, I'm going to remove my lug nuts here so I can remove my tool. Let's hold on to that backing plate. We can remove the bearing. There it is, friend. Prior to installing any brand new part, we want to make sure we clean and inspect our mounting area. So we're looking along the inboard side here where our bearing would sit. We want to make sure we give it a quick cleaning, a close inspection. While we're in this area, you can also inspect your mounting bolts. The next thing that we want to do is apply some red thread locker to the threads of each one of our mounting bolts. Continuing on, we're using anti-seize on the splined area of our axle, not necessarily the threaded portion where our axle nut would be. Now let's get ready to install our brand new rear wheel bearing. When we go to install the wheel bearing, we need to make sure we have it in the proper orientation. Looking inside this area, you can tell that the upper bolts are closer together than the lower mounting bolts. Now, if we were looking at our wheel bearing, you can tell that the flange has the same shape here. Of course, if it was upside down, you're going to find that you have an issue. As we start pressing the bearing over the axle, we need to make sure we align each one of our 4 mounting bolts. Once I'm holding this in position, I'm going to go from the inboard side, start in each one of my mounting bolts. I like to make sure I start them all in before tightening so I can maneuver things around as necessary. Start again, let's snug them up. When snugging these bolts, we're going to go in a crisscross manner, confirming we seat this bearing properly. Once you have all pieces of hardware snugged, torque them to 98 foot-pounds. Now that we have the backing plate in place, we're looking along the backside. In this area, we're going to go ahead and secure our emergency brake cable. Let's install our two 10mm headed mounting bolts. We'll continue on with some anti-seize on the hub mating surface. The areas that we need to focus is along the very center and along the outer edge. That's the raised areas. Just a thin coating should do. Now let's have a look at our brake rotor. We're looking along the inboard side. We need to make sure we clean the area where our hub will sit. Some parts cleaner and a clean rag. We'll just give this a quick wipe. Remove any miscellaneous debris. You can use a wire brush or some sandpaper as necessary. Let's install the brake rotor. Now, once you have it in place, we're continuing on. I like to have a spacer, and I use my original lug nut. We're going to put this in place so it holds the rotor directly against this area. The next thing we have to do is make sure that our adjustment port is in the upright position. We're going to carefully make our way inside this area. I use a flat blade screwdriver to make the adjustment for my parking brake shoe. We want to make sure that the shoe is just barely touching up against the inside of the brake rotor. Once you feel any drag, you want to back it off just enough that you do not hear any. At that point, we would continue on with protecting the area. Install your rubber protective plug. It's time for our brake caliper. We'll get this in position. Before we start in our mounting hardware, we need to confirm that our flex hose is not twisted in a way that might restrict brake fluid flow. Now, as far as our two mounting bolts, I've cleaned the threads, and I always like to use some red thread locker on my caliper bracket mounting bolts. We're going to start in the hardware. Once both pieces are started in, we can snug them up and then torque them to 66 foot-pounds. Now it's time to install our two axle nuts. We're going to start with the first axle nut. Now, as you can see, I'm closer to the ground here. I have to try to prevent this from spinning. If you had a second person, they could step on the brake. While holding it, we can install the axle nut and, of course, torque it. If you do not have a second person, this is the reason why I'm down at the ground, I'm using a long pry bar across my lug studs, being careful not to cause any damage. Now at this point, as we start installing our axle nut, I'm using a hand tool, never an impact tool, on the bearing. It could cause damage. Now that I have this mounting nut bottomed out, I'm going to be torquing this to 203 foot-pounds. Once I have it torqued, I have to re-loosen it, and then I'm going to re-torque this to 203 foot-pounds a second time. Now, as for the outer mounting nut, we're going to bottom this out against the first mounting nut. The torque for this will be 129 foot-pounds. Get this off of here. One last quick inspection in this area, and let's reinstall our wheel. Once you have your wheel in place, continue on to all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. We'll start them on, bottom them out, Get the wheels safely on the ground and torque each of them to 100 foot-pounds. We've got the wheels safely on the ground. Let's go ahead and torque these to that 100 foot-pounds. Torqued. If you have a center cover, install that now. When installing our center cover, we want to ensure that our lug nuts are aligned with their corresponding ports. Just line it up, drive it in. Double check to make sure it's secured all the way around. Okay friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you want to do is hop in the passenger compartment. You're going to pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Go ahead and start the vehicle, take it for a road test, listen for any odd noises, make sure you have no ABS light, and get yourself a four-wheel alignment. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.